Hi, everyone. Welcome to my podcast. This podcast is, of course, the story behind the story. And today we're going to cover American detective fiction writers, author motivation, my nights. Now, book reviews, author interviews, and writing tips are central to this podcast and stories. Every author has a story to tell. What was their motivation? What is their story behind their story? Each week, I conjure up a podcast to spark your interest and satisfy that eternal question, why? Occasionally, I'll examine unique books, sometimes my own, sometimes someone else's, possibly do an interview with a writer if I can find one, or an author. I may present a book review or even suggest some current writing tips. Remember, everyone has a story to tell, and this is the story behind the story. Stay tuned. So, today we're going to do a switch. Instead of another chapter, which can be very dull and boring, let's take a good look at some of the authors who wrote these detective stories. What motivated them? Why did they write the hard-boiled detective as their character? They certainly didn't copy the British writers, the Queens. They were absolutely independent and they wrote their own stories of what they felt a private eye detective would be like. He was a man on the street who dealt with crime each and every day. He used his intelligence as well as a gun occasionally, and perhaps even his fists if he needed to. He was clever, and he took on cases that he thought were worthy of his time and his efforts. Life for him was not easy. Occasionally, he had to deal with unpleasant dead bodies or crime scenes, or perhaps an unsavory character from like drug lords or pornography. Pornographists, is that a word? I'm not sure. The underbelly of society, the unpleasant part, the part that he would never show to his mother or his girlfriend or his sister. He was true to his inner beliefs, his core values, as we would describe them. Not really so different from the knights of old, and there were battles, always against adversaries. Now, our knights, excuse me, if they felt someone was in trouble and needed help, they would definitely help them, sometimes for a fee, sometimes not. Knights in the Middle Ages were elite, heavily armored, mounted warriors who stood for military service to a lord, upholding the code of chivalry and defending the Christian faith. Well, they represented a social class bound to protect the weak, the church, and their land while embodying virtues of courage, honor, and loyalty. Well, our knights are similar, they're not exact. Now, the key aspects of what knights stood for, and this is more like our guys, chivalry and honor. Knights were expected to adhere to a code of conduct, emphasizing bravery, honesty, fair play, and courtesy, especially toward women and the defenseless. I believe, as I read their works, that the authors or creators of these detectives were writing about their own chivalry and honor. As private investigators, they never became rich or affluent, nor did they live in poverty. They were honest and upheld the law. many times clashing with local police or local law, but always solving the crime. Today, our first detective writer, let's capture Dashiell Hammett. And there is a picture of him. Dashiell Hammett was born May 27th, 1894, and he died in January of 1961. And he was an American writer. Now, this is from Wikipedia, and I'm quoting. He was an American writer of hard-boiled detective novels and short stories. He was also a screenwriter and a political activist. Among the characters he created are Sam Spade, the Maltese Falcon, Nick and Nora Charles, the Thin Man, the Continental OP, Red Harvest, and the Dane Curse. Now, he doesn't name the Continental OP, he never does. And the comic strip character, Secret Agent X-9. Now, I wish I had seen those. I'll have to check that out. I think that's kind of interesting. Hammett is regarded as one of the very best mystery writers. In his obituary in the New York Times, he was described as the dean of the hard-boiled school of detective fiction. Now, let's see. Included Hammett's 1929 novel, Red Harvest, on its list of 100 best English language novels published between 1923 and 2005. In 1990, the Crime Writers Association picked 3 of his 5 novels for their list of the top 100 crime novels of all time. And as selected by the Mystery Writers of America. 5 years later, The Maltese Falcon placed second in the top 100 mystery novels of all time. Now, Red Harvest, The Glass Key. Now, I haven't read either of those. I don't know if you have or not. The Thin Man is also another novel. We're also on the list. His novels and stories also had a significant influence on mystery films, including the style that came to be known as film noir, N-O-I-R. Now, his early life. Hammett was born near Great Mills on the Hopewell and Ames farm in St. Mary's County, Maryland. His dad was Richard Thomas Hammett, and his wife was Anne Bond Dashiell. His mother belonged to an old Maryland family whose name in French was Dashiell, like Dashiell, okay. So he had an elder sister, Aronia, and a younger brother, Richard Jr., known as Sam. Hammett was baptized a Catholic and grew up in Philadelphia and Baltimore. Hammett's family moved to Baltimore when he was 4 years old in 1898, and for the most part, it was the city where he lived until he left permanently in 1920 when he was 26 years old. As a teen, Hammett attended the Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, but his formal education ended during his first year of high school. He dropped out in 1908 when he was 13 years old due to his father's declining health and the need for him to earn money to support the family. Pretty young, huh? Hammett had held several jobs before working for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, and I think this is an interesting part. It probably gives you an idea of how he wrote those novels. He served as an operative for Pinkerton from 1915 to February 1922, with time off to serve in World War I. While working for Pinkerton in Baltimore, he learned the trade and worked in the Continental Trust Building. Oh, how does the Continental OP? Really, how he got the name? I can see the connection. I don't know if you can. He said that while some that with he said that while with Pinkertons, he was sent to Butte, Montana during miners' union strikes, though some researchers doubt this really happened. The agency's role in strike breaking eventually left him disillusioned. Hammett enlisted in 1918 and served in the United States Army Ambulance Service. He was afflicted during that time with the Spanish flu and later contracted tuberculosis. He spent most of his time in the Army as a patient at Cushman Hospital in Tacoma, Washington. And that's where he met a nurse, Josephine Dolan, who he married in July of 1921 in San Francisco. Now, his career and personal life. Now, there's a picture of a building at 891 Post Street in San Francisco where Hammett lived while writing The Maltese Falcon. The character, Sam Spade, may have also lived in the building. Hammett was first published in 1922 in the magazine The Smart Set, known for the authenticity and realism of his writing. He drew on his experiences as a Pinkerton operative. Hammett wrote most of his detective fiction while he was living in San Francisco in the 1920s. So streets and other locations in San Francisco are frequently mentioned in his stories. And yes, I found that. He said, I do take most of my characters from real life. His novels were some of the first to use dialogue that sounded authentic to the area. In other words, almost a colloquial dialogue. So the bulk of his early work featured a nameless private investigator, yep, the Continental OP, and he appeared in leading crime fiction pulp magazines called The Black Mask, and we've talked about that before. Both Hammett and the magazine struggled in the period where Hammett became established. Okay, have I bored you yet? He has kind of an interesting background, and it gets even more interesting. Lillian Hellman in 1935. Now, she plays a big part in his life. Because of a disagreement with editor Philip C. Cody about money owed from previous stories, Hammett briefly stopped writing for Black Mask in 1926. He then took a full-time job as an advertisement copywriter for the Albert S. Samuels Company, a San Francisco jeweler. He was wooed back to writing for the Black Mask by Joseph Thompson Shaw, who became the new editor in the summer of 1926, and Hammett dedicated his first novel to Shaw and his second novel, The Dane Curse, to Samuels. Both these novels and his mask, his third, The Maltese Falcon, and the fourth, The Glass Key, were first serialized in the Black Mask before being revised and edited for publication by Alfred A. Knopf, Knopf, and I know you'd recognize that name. The Maltese Falcon, considered to be his best work, is dedicated to his wife, Josephine. Now, he was ill for the better part of his adult life. First, TB, tuberculosis, then alcohol, then being incarcerated for 9 months in a federal prison for refusing to tell on his friends. Contempt of court was the reason. And then this explains jail time for him. Hammett served his sentence in a West Virginia federal penitentiary where, according to Lillian Hellman, he was assigned to clean toilets. Can you imagine? It's pretty sad, isn't it? Hellman noted in her eulogy of Hammett that he submitted to prison rather than reveal the name of the contributors to the fund because he had come to the conclusion that a man should keep his word. And doesn't that sound just like a knight? Okay, there's a picture of him. You can see how thin he is. It was on the cover of his final novel, The Thin Man. Now, let's see, for much of 1929 and 1930, he was romantically involved with Nell Martin, a writer of short stories and several novels. He dedicated The Glass Key to her. I haven't read The Glass Key. I wonder if any of you have. And in turn, she dedicated her novel, Lovers Should Marry, to him. You think that was a hint? In 1931, Hammett embarked on a 30-year romantic relationship with a playwright, Lillian Hellman. Though he sporadically continued to work on material, he wrote his final novel in 1933, more than 25 years before his death. The Thin Man is dedicated to Hellman. Why he moved away from fiction is not certain. Hellman speculated in a posthumous collection of Hammett's novels. I think, this is quoting her, but I only think I know a few of the reasons. He wanted to do a new kind of work. He was sick for many of those years and getting sicker. In the 1940s, Hellman and he lived at her home in Hardscrabble Farm in Pleasantville, New York. So sad, isn't it, huh? They didn't all have happy lives. Raymond Chandler, another author, often considered Hammett's successor, summarized his accomplishments in his essay, The Simple Art of Murder. Hammett gave murder, this is a quote now from Chandler. Hammett gave murder back to the kind of people that commit for reasons, not just to provide a corpse, and with the means at hand, not with hand-wrought dueling pistols, curia, and tropical fish. Now, I don't know what that means. He is said to have lacked heart, yet the story he thought most of himself in The Glass Key is the record of a man's devotion to a friend. He was spare, frugal, hard-boiled, but he did over and over again only what the best writer can ever do at all. He wrote scenes that seemed never to have been written before. Now, amazing, isn't it? You know, he's really looked upon by other authors as being incredibly good at his job. So, there you have this week's podcast, the story of Samuel Dashiell Hammett. His characters will live on forever in his books. Now you have Red Harvest, 1929, The Dane Curse, 1929, The Maltese Falcon, 1930, The Glass Key, 1931, Woman in the Dark, 1933, and The Thin Man in 1934. And this one is, I've never heard this title before. They Can Only Hang You Once in 1944. I think I'd like to read that one. And now my technical information. This podcast is created on Zoom and sent to YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Spotify for podcasters. You can find us on Spotify, Anchor FM, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Podcasts, Google Play, Amazon Radio, and now YouTube Radio. Phew, can't believe I finally got the podcast up on YouTube. It was a journey. Anyhow, our theme, which I haven't figured out how to add that to the podcast yet. Dark Mystery is the name of it, and I purchased it through Pawns, so I have the right to use it. But I'll be darned if I can figure out how to get it in here. Anyhow, you can contact me at sdanderson.books@gmail.com or my website on BookBub at www.sdandersonbooks.com. So, have I forgotten anything? Yes, to thank you for listening to my podcast. I'm so grateful that you stayed with me as I muddled through the technical labyrinth that surrounds the publishing of a podcast. And I thought the publishing of a novel was a challenge. Please pass the link around if you think someone else might like to listen. God, I don't know why. Unfortunately, I do write murder mysteries in which there is an occasional dead body or a few ghosts. So we are not murder-free. I do hope you will forgive me for that. Besides, this podcast is leaning towards more mysteries, murder, and mayhem as I research the golden age of detective writers both here and in England. Thank you so much. See you next week. Stay tuned. We made it. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Take care and have a great week.